Iran, regional powerhouse, a thorn in the US's side for several years. As NPR noted in January of 2020, ever since former President Donald Trump pulled out of the Joint Coalition Plan of Action, a deal meant to curb Iranian aggression, the country of Iran has been getting substantially more aggressive and dangerous in the region. They led an attack on Saudi oil fields that sent the international crude markets into chaos. They're coming closer and closer to nuclearization, and they carried out a raid on a U.S. base, giving head trauma to several soldiers who were injured in the raid. Any one of these three offenses would be enough to land Iran a spot in the world's most dangerous countries to the U.S. However, Iran has done all three of them. It is blatantly obvious that Iran is a horrifying country to U.S. interests in the region. Because of this, everyone across the world is wondering, what sort of real threat does Iran pose? Could this relatively small Middle Eastern country truly be a thorn in the US, the world's most powerful country's side? The answer is yes, absolutely. This is because Iran poses a lethal existential threat to America's allies and interests in the region. This is because they may very well nuclearize, which would lead them to plunge the region into chaos. Their navy could quite literally sink our interests in the region, and finally, the US quite clearly is not in any shape to confront them. Let's start off with the fact that Iran is on the brink of nuclearization. As The Hill noted on April 14th of 2021, ever since President Trump pulled out of the JCPOA with Iran, they have been taking more and more steps towards nuclearization. Most recently, they harvested uranium and put it at 60% purity. 60% purity uranium is not something that nuclear power plants use to help people gain power. It is what the US and the USSR used to create nuclear weapons. What this quite clearly demonstrates is that Iran is on the path to gain nukes, and they're also on the path to gain the instruments to use them. As the Jerusalem Post reported on April 6th of 2021, Iran currently has 150,000 ballistic missiles, many of them capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Even more concerningly, almost all of them are pointed at Israel, one of the United States' best allies in the region and a vital part of our interests. What this quite clearly displays is that Iran is on the verge of nuclearization, and they're also on the verge of using their nuclearization to harm the allies that matter to us in the region. There is a reason that nuclear weapons are considered the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Ever since the US saw two cities leveled in a matter of seconds by these nuclear weapons, it's been unanimously agreed that it is the international community's obligation to stop dangerous and irresponsible countries from getting them. Unfortunately, Iran is on the verge of gaining nuclear weapons, which would plunge the region into chaos and destroy our interests in the long run. Nuclear weapons aren't the only concerning military presence Iran has to oppose us. Their navy is also getting surprisingly sophisticated. As the National Interest, a US-based think tank, reported in December of 2020, Iran's navy is getting more and more powerful by the day. Most recently, they added the Strahel-class warship, a frigate-class vessel capable of sinking United States warships. There are very few countries in the Middle East who are capable of sinking US warships, but Iran has positioned itself as being one of them. Additionally, Mark Episkopos, a military expert, reported in March of 2021 that Iran is also equipping its vessels with S-300 missiles that are most effective against aircraft. The US Navy, in its combat, usually focuses on using both air and naval superiority to crush our opponents. The fact that they're specifically creating weapons designed to target aircraft is concerning, and it's quite clear evidence of the fact that Iran is preparing to use their navy against the United States. Now, as Epikopos states, it is extremely unlikely that Iran's navy could ever really stand against the US in an outright face-off. However, their massive amounts of small ships and landmine placers quite clearly demonstrates that they have the capacity to close off essential straits. Iran is an extremely vital nation geographically. They're close to the Hormuz Straits as well as entries to the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. All of these are essential networks for oil trade across the US. Our country relies on hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil from these regions every day. most of them shipped through sea lanes. What this quite clearly demonstrates is that Iran has the capacity to sink our interests in the region. Their navy is quite clearly capable of holding off these straits and defending them against US vessels. This is concerning, and it's just one reason why Iran poses an existential threat to the United States. However, perhaps the most convincing reason why Iran poses an existential threat to the US is because the US currently isn't in a mood to fight them. As the Wall Street Journal reported on April 15th of 2021, President Joe Biden has made no secret of his intention to pull the United States out of what he calls the forever wars in the Middle East. He recently pledged that all US troops in Afghanistan and several other countries would be gone by September 11th of 2021. This is extremely concerning. While his desire to remove the US presence is understandable for a variety of reasons, it's undeniable that pulling the US out of the region would embolden Iran. As William Burns, director of the CIA, reported back in April of 2021, the withdrawal of U.S. forces would be a factor that could increase the boldness of Iran, as they know that an attack on the U.S.'s allies wouldn't draw nearly as much international backlash as an attack on U.S. forces. What this quite clearly displays is that the U.S. is stopping its confrontation of Iran, and they'll feel emboldened as a result, making them even more of a threat to our interests. To conclude, today we talked about what real threat Iran poses to the United States of America's interests. And it is rather clear that they pose an existential threat to our allies and interests in the region. This is because they're on the verge of nuclearization. Their navy could sink our interests, and finally, the US isn't willing to fight them. President Joe Biden clearly doesn't have the will to openly combat Iran. However, perhaps it's time that he should.